Hi there guys, and welcome to another video. Now today's video, I was planning on it being a 2-minute tips video, but I've got a feeling it's going to go on for a little bit longer. So what we're going to be looking at today is how we can connect to the Unraid server and get that nice little secure padlock and connect to the server's GUI over HTTPS. Now I'm sure you've all seen when you connect over HTTP, it says this site's not secure. So today's video, we're going to be looking at various different ways we can actually connect to the GUI over HTTPS. And so to use HTTPS, we need an SSL certificate. We can use a self-signed one, but it's much better if it isn't self-signed, because a self-signed certificate will always get a little warning in the browser, and we have to add it as an exception to our browser. So in order to use HTTPS, we need to have an SSL certificate. So in this video, we're going to be looking at various ways we can do that, and I'm also going to show you how you can actually connect to your browser over HTTPS remotely, but without exposing it to the internet. Now I've got to say here right at the beginning of the video, it's really a bad idea in my opinion to just reverse proxy over the open internet your Unraid GUI and have it exposed to the internet. It's just not a good idea to do that. So we're not going to be doing that, but I will be showing you a way you can use your own domain if you want to, and still be able to connect to your server with your own domain, but without having to expose it to the internet. And you don't have your own domain name, don't want to buy one, that's fine too. I'll be showing you ways of how you can connect without actually having to buy a domain name. Anyway, let's get started I think. Let's jump onto a server and take a look. Okay, so here we are on my little N100 server, Nebuchadnezzar. And as you can see at the top here, it says this is not secure. Now obviously that's because we're not connected over HTTPS, we're connected over HTTP. Now to be quite honest, personally this doesn't bother me at all, and I normally always access my servers locally over HTTP. But I know a lot of you guys would really like to have that nice little padlock and it say it's secure, so that's what we're going to do today. So let's start from the easiest way and work forward from there. So I'm going to go across onto the settings tab here, and then I'm going to go to management access. Now here we can see the various URLs I can actually access my server with. Both of these currently are HTTP. So I've got the local IP address here, and I've got the name of the server .local. Either of these will bring me through to the Unraid GUI, but obviously each time the browser reporting it's not secure. So all we need to do here is just enable SSL. So I'm going to change this from no to yes, and I'm going to click on to apply. So now we can see the next problem that we've got. So we've enabled SSL, but it still says the site's not secure. We can see we're connected by HTTPS, and if we click onto this, we're still getting the same warnings, basically because of our SSL certificate is just a self-signed certificate. And if I click onto the details here, there we can see it's self-signed, and because it's self-signed, that's why we're still getting this warning. So yes, I could go on to advanced here and just proceed, but really to me, I think that's much more hassle than just sticking to plain HTTP. So what can we do about this? Well, if we scroll down here now, we can see all of these different URLs which we can connect to the server with. And you'll notice here at the moment, anything HTTP is redirected to HTTPS. So what can we do then if we don't want to have this self-signed certificate and we want to just be able to have our browser accept going to our web GUI without moaning that something's not right? Well, what we need to do is provision an SSL certificate. So we can do this straight from the Unraid GUI here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click onto provision here, and this will generate an SSL certificate that's related to a domain name. So let's have a look here now. And here we can see we've got another URL. And if we look at the beginning of the URL, we've got 10.10.20.200, which is actually the IP address, the local IP address of my Unraid server. So what's happened here is an SSL certificate has been provisioned because we're using a domain name, which is myunraid.net, but this DNS record will point through to the local IP. So it doesn't actually go through the internet at all. But what it will allow me to do is if I click on here now, and I can just log in as normal. So now here we can see the connection's secure and the certificate's valid here. But you'll also notice this is like a really long URL. If you had to type it in, you'd never remember what it is. So there's two things we can do about that. We could either bookmark it and have it bookmarked in our browser. But also what we can do if we don't really want to do that is, if you remember when we're in settings and then management access, when we went to the HTTP, it forwards to HTTPS. So we can do a similar thing to force all of these URLs to actually go through to this URL here. And to do that, we change use SSL from yes to strict. So that means is it forces everything that we try and log in with to go through this actual URL here. Now this has pros and cons. Obviously the pros is you don't have to remember anything and it will always go through to here. But the cons are, if you ever want to actually access your server by an IP, well, you can't do that. So anyway, let's have a look at what it's like here and click on to apply. And let's go up to the top here, and I'm just going to type in here the local IP address. For me, that's 10.10.20.200 and hit enter. And you can see here it's redirecting me back through to the SSL domain. Connection secure, certificates valid. So this is a really easy way to be able to connect by HTTPS. But there's one thing I want you to know is it doesn't matter how you connect to the actual Unraid GUI. When we open up a web UI of a container, well, the container here it's saying it's not secure. That's because the container's web UI is separate to the Unraid web UI. So if you wanted to connect to Jellyfin over HTTPS, we'd have to make a solution for Jellyfin for that to work. And the easiest way really to connect to something like Jellyfin over HTTPS is to just integrate Tailscale into the actual container. Now, I've done a video about this before, so if you want to know about how to do this, then I've got a very long video over on the Uncast show. But this is just something I thought I'd make beginners aware that changing the web GUI to be HTTPS only affects the web GUI of the server and not the services that are running on the server itself. Now, personally, I don't really like, in the management access, having the SSL set to strict. And the reason being for that is because how the domain works, the URL resolves to the local IP address of my server. For instance, if I ping this, we'll see here it's returning my 10.10.20.200, which is the local IP address for this server. So the problem can be if I'm on a computer and maybe my internet's down, it's not going to be able to resolve this subdomain of myunraid.net. So the DNS just isn't going to work because I'm not connected to the internet. So for me, I'd rather not risk that, and I think it's better to just bookmark your myunraid.net URL and set the SSL to yes and not strict. That way you can actually connect via the actual IP address or by the URL. I think that's a safer way, just in case you have problems in the future. But I'm going to show you what I think is the best way to connect to your Unraid server via HTTPS. And also it's going to allow us to connect to the server from anywhere in the world, and it's going to be totally private and not exposed to the internet. So what we're going to be using is we're going to be using Tailscale. So at the moment we can see these are the certificates we've got connected to our domains. And in fact, I'm going to turn off SSL here, just so we're starting from absolutely nothing. And I'm going to scroll down and just delete the certificate. Now for this to work, we're going to have to obviously make sure we've got Tailscale installed. So for that, let's just go to the Apps tab, search for Tailscale. And if you don't have the Tailscale plugin installed, then make sure to install that. Once it's installed, you'll see it in settings here. Just click onto it, and we're going to need to authenticate the server. And here we can see Nebuchadnezzar is now onto my tailnet. But what we need to do is we need to go to DNS here, and we need to scroll down and make sure that HTTPS certificates, we need to have this enabled. So now with that done, that is really pretty much all we need to do. So we can see here the name of my tailnet is fox-garibaldi.ts.net. So to get to my server is going to be super easy. Let's go back to the actual Unraid web UI here, and we can see here is the actual domain name, nebuchadnezzar.foxgaribaldi.ts.net. I'm going to copy that and let's paste this in. And now we can see here it's fully secure, the certificate's valid, and obviously I can log in. And now let's go to settings here and go to management access. And if we scroll down now, we can see here Tailscale's Let's Encrypt certificate is available for our Tailscale URL. And obviously the only person that can connect to this is me, because you have to be connected to my tailnet for this domain to work. So if you go and try and type this in now, it's not going to go anywhere for you because you're not on my tailnet. So it's a really nice way of being able to connect to your server using HTTPS, but you can still use the local IP address as well if you want to. And also, if you want to, you can use the Tailscale IP address if you didn't want to use the domain. But for using HTTPS, then we just use our Tailscale subdomain to be able to connect to our server. Okay, so in my opinion, that's the best way to connect. And these two ways are really the best ways, definitely for beginners. But I know some of you out there, you might like to use your own domain and being able to do exactly the same. So like I said earlier, I don't recommend actually reverse proxying over the internet and exposing your server on the public internet. But we can do a very similar thing as what we saw in the first method, where we create a DNS record for our Unraid server, but what we have it do is point to the Tailscale IP rather than the actual local IP address of the server. So then this means that we can link that to a domain name and then use a reverse proxy to generate a Let's Encrypt certificate for that subdomain that then points to this IP address. So I think the easiest thing for me to do is just go through it and show you how to do it. Now, normally I wouldn't actually set up an A record pointing to the actual IP address of the server and use that for the reverse proxy. Now, if you've watched previous Tailscale videos I've done in the past, I've installed Tailscale into Swag and used that as a reverse proxy. So those of you who have seen those videos, you might be wondering why I'm going to use the actual IP address of the server and not just install Tailscale into the container and use its own IP address. Well, I want to make this video fairly easy to follow for people who may be new to Unraid, so we're going to be using Nginx Proxy Manager today. And there's a couple of nuances with Nginx Proxy Manager, which means that installing Tailscale into that container won't work for us because Nginx Proxy Manager doesn't listen on port 443 for its incoming traffic. It uses a different port. So this is why today we're going to be using the IP address of the server and route the traffic through that. So let's go across onto the Apps tab here, and I'm going to search for Nginx Proxy Manager. So I'm going to install this here. Okay, so in the template here, there's just one thing we need to change. Now, personally, I don't use Nginx Proxy Manager myself. I prefer either Caddy or Swag. And Nginx Proxy Manager has a little nuance here, is the internal port that it listens on is actually 4443. So because of this, I can't do what I'd normally do, which is install Tailscale inside of this container, because it doesn't listen on internal port 443. So that's why we're going to set up an A record pointing to the IP address of the actual server itself and use that for the reverse proxy IP. And use 443 here, and then the container mapping will send that to the internal 4443. But what you're going to notice is when I pull down the container, we are going to have an error because this port is going to be in use. So I just want to show you that error happen. And we can see here, it's saying that port's already in use. Now, it isn't another container that's actually using this port. It's actually Unraid that's using it, even though we're not using SSL. So what we need to do is go to settings here and then management access. And here under HTTPS port, here I'm going to make this 4443. So just something that's out of the range of 443. Okay, so now let's go back and edit this template here. And I just want to go through some of these things here. Now, all of this where it says forwarding ports and stuff, we're not doing any of this. Rather than port forwarding, we're using Tailscale to do everything that port forwarding would do. So none of this we need to worry about, and so don't go forwarding anything through from your router unless you want to actually use this reverse proxy for public-facing things that aren't your server. So maybe if you're using Nextcloud, you might want nextcloud.yourdomain.com, and then you would use the port forwarding. But for what we're using today, we're using everything through Tailscale. Because we don't want our Unraid server to be public-facing, then we don't need to worry about any of that. Okay, so now because I've actually changed that port that Unraid was using, we should now be able to actually install this container correctly. Okay, so this time that worked. Okay, so with the container installed now, let's just grab the Tailscale IP of my actual server, and we're going to need to make what's called an A record for our domain that will point through to this IP address. Now, I use Cloudflare for my DNS and for buying my domains. So I'm going to go across to Cloudflare now and log in there. And so here we can see my domain. So I'm going to click onto that and go to DNS. So here we need to create what's called an A record. Now, if you don't know what an A record is, it's basically a name that points through to an IP address. So I'm going to click onto add record here. And for the name here, this is the subdomain part of your domain name. I'm going to call this server. So this will be what I type in when I want to access my Unraid server. For me, it will be server.my-domain.uk. And so here we need to put in the IPv4 address. And so that is the Tailscale address of the Unraid server. Now, because this isn't accessible to anyone else, because it's a local IP address, this will do pretty much exactly the same as what the Unraid DNS did in the first method we looked at in this video, but we're doing it for basically a local Tailscale address. So I'm going to paste that in here, and very important, we don't want to be proxying this because it must be just a DNS record. Okay, so with that done, I'm going to click onto save, and now let's go back across to the Unraid server, and I'm going to open Nginx Proxy Manager's web UI here. Okay, so when you first log in, there's a default username and password that we need to put in. And we can find that in the actual template of the container. It's admin@example.com and the password's change me. So let's pop that in and log in. So now it's going to ask us to basically change the admin user here. So I'm just going to pop in an email address here. I'll leave the name as it is, and I'm going to click save. And so now it's going to ask for the current password, which is obviously change me. And I'm going to put in a new password and click save. Okay, so we've got our user now. So now what we will need to do is to make what's called a host. So I'm going to click onto it here, and we want a proxy host. So let's just click on add proxy host. And here we need to put in the domain name. And the domain name is what we created earlier, which was server.my-domain.uk. So I'm going to put that in here. And we need to click beneath it here where it says add. Okay, so that's the domain name that we're going to want to proxy. So the IP address we're proxying to is the local IP address of your Unraid server. So I'm going to go here and go to settings and network settings. And here I'm going to take the IPv4 address of my Unraid server. So back at Nginx Proxy Manager, I'm going to paste that in. Now for scheme, we do leave it as HTTP. Now, yeah, it does sound a bit weird because we want it over HTTPS, and that's what this video is all about. But Nginx Proxy Manager will handle all of that. And we're using port 80 on Unraid, so that's where we want it forwarding to. Now I'm going to select WebSocket support here, and now we need to make an SSL certificate. So I'm going to click onto SSL here, and I'm going to select here, and I'm going to put request new SSL certificate with Let's Encrypt. I'm going to select Force SSL here, and what we're going to be using is what's called a DNS challenge. So what this is it allows Let's Encrypt to be able to make a little DNS change in our DNS for our domain, then it reads that back, and if it can see it, well, it knows obviously we own the domain, and it allows us to create the certificate. So to do that, we need to toggle this here, where it says use a DNS challenge, and we choose who runs our DNS. So obviously I'm using Cloudflare, but there's a whole load of other ones here, like GoDaddy if you're using them, Google here, a whole bunch of providers. But obviously I'm going to click onto Cloudflare, and here you see it says that we need an API token. So this API token will allow interaction with my DNS at Cloudflare to do the verification. So let's go back across to Cloudflare here. Then in the top right hand corner here, I'm going to click onto my profile. Then on the left, API tokens. And now we don't use the global API. We need to create our own one. So let's click on create token here. And all we need it to do is to be able to edit zone DNS. So we're going to click here to use this template. The first line we leave as is. On the second line, zone resources, here where it says specific zone, to the right of it, I'm just going to select and choose my domain. Now, if you had more domains at Cloudflare, you would just choose the domain from a list of them. But I've only got one here, so there's just one that shows for me. Okay, so with that done, I just click continue to summary and then click create token. Simple as that. So here is my token. I'm going to click copy. Now, obviously, when I finish this video, I'm going to delete this token, so it won't be valid. So now back across to Nginx Proxy Manager, and I'm going to paste this over the top of that kind of dummy one here. And we can see that's in. Then everything else here, we can just leave as is. We just need to agree to the terms of service and then just click save. So now what it's doing is it's going to be creating an SSL certificate for this domain, and fingers crossed, everything should be good and we should be able to access the server. Okay, great. So we can see our proxy host has been created. Our certificates, let's encrypt here. And if we click here on SSL certificates, we'll see the certificate for that subdomain there. So I guess there's nothing else to do but just to try it out and see if we can get to the server. So I've popped in the domain here and let's hit enter, and it's saying the site can't be reached. So we've got to think, what's going wrong here? So let's come back here and just restart Nginx Proxy Manager. Because we created that new host, probably restarting it will make it actually load it. So with Nginx Proxy Manager restarted, let's try again. And here we are, connected to server.my-domain.uk, totally secure with a valid certificate. So that's 3 different ways we can connect our Unraid server web GUI via HTTPS, 2 of which we can connect from anywhere, one using a Tailscale domain and the other using our own domain. And if you're using Nginx Proxy Manager like we are here, there's no reason why you couldn't connect lots of different things through the Tailscale and expose your services with a domain name, but having it totally private that no one else can access it but you. Because just remember, these DNSs here, they're just private DNSs. All Tailscale DNSs are private, so they can't ever be accessed by anyone else but you. So when anyone else tries to go to these domains, it's just a blank page for them saying page can't be found. Anyway guys, that brings us to the end of this video. Now, I knew it was going to be not a 2-minute tips, it's more like a 20-minute tips, but I really hope this video is useful for you beginners out there, and even seasoned Unraid users. Maybe you found a couple of things in this video that were helpful to you that you may not have known. Anyway guys, I want to say a really big thank you to all of my patrons and supporters out there who support this channel. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. It really does mean the world to me. And if any of you guys out there want to join these great bunch of people, then please see the links in the description below. Anyway guys, it's getting late here and it's time for me to go, but whatever you're up to for the rest of the day, I hope it's good, and I'll catch you in the next video.